Summer break had just started, and already I was losing my mind. The first week back home was always a mix of comfort and quiet dread. My hometown was small, quieter than I remembered, like the volume had been turned down on life itself. My parents were out of town for a few weeks visiting my aunt in Michigan, so it was just me in the house, which creaked too loudly in the evenings. Most of my friends had jobs or internships lined up. I had nothing. No plans, no direction. Just long mornings in my childhood bed, scrolling through my phone and waiting for something to matter. Then Josh called. We hadn't spoken much since spring semester ended. He stayed in town year-round, working part-time, and helping out at his family's auto shop. I figured he was just checking in, until he launched into a favor request without even a hello. "Hey, listen, I was wondering if you could do me a huge solid," I laughed dryly. "That's how you start a conversation now?" "I mean, technically," I said, "Hey." He paused. "But yeah, my uncle needs some help." I blinked at the ceiling. "Help? With what?" "Just small stuff. Yard work, lifting things. His knee's shot, had surgery a few weeks ago, and he's not supposed to do much. I'd go, but I've got double shifts this week." I hesitated. "I don't know, man. It's easy. He's cool, kind of quiet, keeps to himself. You won't have to babysit him or anything. Just show up, help out, maybe keep him company a bit." "Can't he hire someone?" Josh sighed. "He doesn't really do well with strangers. He trusts me, and I trust you. Come on, you've got time, right?" He wasn't wrong, and honestly, something about the idea intrigued me. Maybe it was the boredom talking, or maybe it was that part of me that always wanted to be needed. "Fine," I said. "Text me the address." The next morning, I drove out to Carter's place, following Josh's directions until the road turned to gravel. His uncle lived a few miles past the main strip, tucked behind tall oak trees and weathered fence posts. The house came into view slowly, a two-story farmhouse with chipped white paint and ivy creeping up the porch railings. A red truck sat parked at an angle on the grass. Wind chimes danced lazily in the breeze. It felt peaceful. The kind of place where time moved slower. I parked and stepped out, unsure whether to knock or just announce myself. Before I could decide, the screen door creaked open and he stepped out. Carter. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Tall, broad-shouldered, a few days' worth of stubble on his jaw. He wore a plain gray t-shirt and worn jeans, one leg wrapped in a soft black brace. His presence was steady, like the kind of man who never rushed to speak just to fill the silence. His eyes, blue, deep-set and calm, met mine with a look I couldn't quite read. "You must be Josh's friend," he said, voice low and even. "Yeah, I'm Alex." He nodded, stepping aside. "Appreciate you coming. You didn't have to." "It's no trouble," I said, though my heart was beating faster than it should have been. "Josh said you might need a hand." He led me around the side of the house, gesturing toward the garden beds and a stack of tools. I listened, nodding, trying to focus on his instructions, instead of the warmth in his voice, or the way the sunlight caught on the strands of gray in his hair. There was nothing flirtatious in his manner, nothing inappropriate. Just awareness. Like we both noticed something we wouldn't dare speak aloud. A flicker of recognition in a quiet world. I told myself not to overthink it. He was just a man who needed help, and I was just here to lend a hand. Right? The days blended together like brushstrokes on a faded painting. Mornings started early. Carter would already be outside by the time I arrived, sitting on the porch swing with a thermos of coffee, his knee propped up on a small crate. He never said much, just nodded, offered a quiet morning, and pointed me toward whatever chore needed attention that day. I mowed the lawn, patched up a section of the fence that had rotted near the base, and started clearing out the old shed that looked like it hadn't been touched since the Clinton administration. It was the kind of labor that didn't require much thinking. Just motion and sweat and the occasional sharp curse when I scraped my knuckles. Carter mostly stayed on the porch. Sometimes he'd limp over slowly to check on what I was doing, leaning on a walking stick with a polished oak handle. He never hovered, just offered small bits of advice like, "Watch that corner, it splinters," or "You can toss that whole shelf, it's no good." We didn't talk much at first, but somehow the silences didn't feel awkward. They felt earned. Like he was giving me space to be exactly what I was, without filling it with small talk. Still, I noticed things. The way his eyes lingered. Not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but in a way that made me wonder what he was thinking. How he'd tilt his head slightly when I was hammering something in place like he was quietly impressed. The way he chuckled under his breath when I tripped over a rake handle and tried to play it off like I meant to. He had a softness to him that I hadn't expected. Not softness like fragility, but softness like still water. Deep, quiet, steady. Once, while I was organizing a corner of the shed, I heard music drifting through the open window. Low, scratchy vinyl playing an old blues record. Something aching and beautiful. I stood there for a minute, hammer still in hand, just listening. It didn't seem like music you shared. It seemed like music you kept tucked away for yourself. That night stayed with me. One afternoon, after a long, hot stretch clearing brush along the edge of the property, I made my way back to the house, sweat clinging to my neck and dust in my shoes. Carter was sitting in the shade with 2 glasses of lemonade already sweating on the small side table. "Thought you might want one," he said simply. I took the glass and sank into the wooden chair beside him, grateful for the breeze and the break. We sat in silence for a while, sipping and watching the clouds drift by. It was the kind of silence I didn't know I needed. "I forget how quiet it gets out here," I said after a minute. Carter gave a small nod. "That's the best part. World gets loud, you forget your own voice." I looked over at him. "You always lived out here?" "Moved back a few years ago," he said, eyes still on the horizon. "Used to be married. City life, 9 to 5, traffic, arguments. Didn't suit me in the end." He didn't say it with bitterness. Just calm fact. "I don't get a lot of visitors," he added after a pause. "Don't mind it most days, but it's been nice having someone around." That hit deeper than I expected. It wasn't flirty. It wasn't even personal in a specific way. But it was real. Honest. A door cracked open just slightly. I nodded. "Yeah, I get that." He turned to look at me then, his expression unreadable but not unkind. Just searching. Maybe wondering if I felt the same loneliness. Maybe wondering if I'd come back tomorrow. And in that moment, I knew I would. Even if I wasn't sure why yet. I didn't know what I was looking for this summer. But whatever it was, I was starting to feel it here. Not in the work, but in him. Wasn't supposed to rain that day. The sky had been clear when I arrived. Pale blue, scattered with cotton-thin clouds. I'd gone out to the shed mid-afternoon, determined to finally organize the last corner I'd been putting off. A mess of tangled cords, rusted hinges, and boxes that smelled like mildew and memory. I'd lost track of time. One moment, I was elbow-deep in an old crate of nails, and the next, the wind shifted. The air thickened like it was holding its breath. Then the first crack of thunder rolled in, deep and distant, like someone dragging furniture across the heavens. I stepped to the doorway and looked up. The sky had gone gray, fast. Thick, roiling clouds smothered the sun and the wind picked up, cool and urgent. I grabbed a few tools to tuck inside when the rain came, and it did. Suddenly, violently, with sheets that hit the shed roof like a drumline. I was trapped, and then I heard it. His voice, muffled but close. "Alex?" A few seconds later, Carter appeared in the open doorway, soaked from the short walk. Between the house and the shed, he held a flashlight in one hand and a dry flannel shirt slung over his shoulder. "You all right?" he asked, squinting through the downpour behind him. "Yeah," I said, blinking at the water dripping off my nose. "Didn't think it'd hit this fast." "It wasn't supposed to," he said, stepping inside and shutting the door behind him. The sound of the rain intensified instantly, hammering the roof, pooling outside in shallow streams. The shed darkened, save for the faint yellow beam from his flashlight. He handed me the shirt without a word. I hesitated just a beat too long before taking it. It was soft and oversized, and it smelled faintly of cedar, and something else I couldn't quite name. Something quiet and masculine. "You're soaked," he said simply, turning away as I pulled off my wet shirt. I changed quickly, but the silence stretched in the close air. I could feel the heat rising in my face, not from embarrassment, but from something else. Something harder to name. Carter turned back around once I'd finished. The flashlight cast strange shadows across his face, his jawline, the lines near his eyes. He looked tired, or maybe just thoughtful. We stood there in the dim light, listening to the storm rage above us. Thunder cracked again, louder this time, close enough to rattle the tools hanging on the wall. Carter sat on an old stool in the corner. I stayed standing, arms crossed, unsure what to do with my hands or the way my heart had started acting up again. "Used to like storms," he said after a long silence. "Before they started reminding me how empty the house gets." I glanced at him. "You really don't get many visitors, huh?" He shook his head, a soft smile playing at the edge of his mouth. "Not many people to miss me." There was no self-pity in the way he said it. Just fact. I sat on the workbench across from him. The flashlight beam rested between us on a shelf, casting everything in golden half-light. The rain was relentless. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The slope of his shoulders. The way his fingers tapped absently against his knee brace. The slow inhale and exhale of someone who had made peace with solitude, but not with longing. Something passed between us then. Something wordless but heavy, like an idea forming before either of us could speak it. And in that moment, I realized I wanted to. I wanted to say something. Or do something. Or just admit what I hadn't dared admit until now. That I felt something when he looked at me. When we sat in silence. When his hand brushed mine by accident 2 days ago and lingered half a second too long. But I didn't know what it was. I didn't know if it was mutual, and that made it confusing. Terrifying even. Carter's eyes met mine. For just a moment. Just long enough for me to feel like he saw right through me. Then he looked away, his voice low. "Storm will pass soon." "Yeah," I replied, my throat suddenly dry. "Probably will." But neither of us moved. The shed held us like a secret, and for that moment, I didn't want the rain to stop. Storm knocked out the power just after sunset. It started with a flicker, lights stuttering in the kitchen while I rinsed dirt off my arms at the sink. Then, everything went dark, with a mechanical sigh, as if the whole house had finally exhaled. Carter didn't curse or panic. He just lit 3 thick candles he pulled from the pantry drawer and set them along the kitchen counter like it was a routine inconvenience. I watched the way his face glowed in the low flickering light. Soft amber across the edges of his jaw, dancing in the lines beside his mouth. Somehow, the quiet made him look younger. "We'll have to rough it," he said, handing me a bowl of canned soup he'd warmed before the power cut. "Hope you don't mind lukewarm potato and something." I smiled, sitting down at the kitchen table across from him. Tastes better by candlelight anyway. We ate in near silence at first, the storm still grumbling outside. The candles cast long shadows on the walls, and the rain softened to a steady hush. It felt like the world had shrunk down to this little pocket of warmth. The table, the soup, the sound of Carter stirring his spoon without urgency. "I used to live in Chicago," he said suddenly, voice low. I looked up. Worked for a building firm. Wore a tie. Had a corner office for a while. Thought I had it figured out. "What happened?" I asked gently. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded around his mug. "I got married. We bought a place, settled into the life we thought we were supposed to want, but I think we were both pretending in different ways." "Pretending?" Carter's gaze drifted to the candle nearest him. She wanted a man who could give her a future she could show off. I wanted peace. Something real. And back then, I didn't even know what that meant. He looked up at me then, and though he didn't say it outright, something was different in his tone. Raw. Honest. "People change," he said softly. "I've learned not to define myself so strictly, makes breathing easier. I didn't respond right away. Because I understood. More than I expected to. I feel like I don't know who I'm supposed to be, I said finally, the words surprising even me. At college, everyone has a plan. Grad school, internships, startups. I'm just floating, passing classes, smiling when I should, laughing at things that don't feel funny. Carter watched me with an expression that made me feel both exposed and safe. Maybe you're not floating, he said. Maybe you're just not pretending. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that. There was a long silence after that, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind of silence that settles in the spaces between two people when they've shared something real. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. I looked at him in the candlelight. How the soft glow touched the slope of his cheekbones, the way the shadows deepened the quiet in his eyes. He wasn't handsome in the obvious way. He was weathered, worn in places, built like a man who had lost things and learned to live anyway, and God, he was beautiful for it. Something unspoken stirred between us. Not a question, not a move, just a truth neither of us wanted to disrupt. Thanks for dinner, I said finally, my voice quieter than I meant. Thanks for staying, he replied. We stood up at the same time, and for a second, I thought, maybe. But he only nodded toward the hallway. Guest room's ready. Sheets should be clean. I paused in the doorway, one hand on the frame. He was still standing there, one hand resting lightly on the back of his chair. Our eyes met, just for a second, long enough to say nothing and everything. Good night, Carter, I whispered. Good night, Alex. I went to bed with the sound of the storm in my ears and the warmth of his voice in my chest. And though nothing had happened, nothing physical, nothing spoken, I felt more change than I could explain. Because that night, we hadn't touched. But we had seen each other, and that was somehow more intimate than anything else could have been. The morning after the storm felt different, not in an obvious way. The sky had cleared, the birds were back, and Carter was already outside when I stepped onto the porch. He greeted me the same as always, a quiet nod, a soft morning. But something hung in the air between us, like the echo of something unfinished. We didn't mention the power outage or the candlelight or the soup gone cold, but I caught him watching me a little longer as I walked down the steps, and I knew I was watching him too. We spent the first part of the day repairing. The back steps, one of the middle planks had cracked and the whole set was starting to sag. Carter insisted on helping, even though his knee made every movement slow and deliberate. He knelt beside me as I held a board in place. His hand reached over mine to guide it straight, fingers brushing the back of my knuckles. He didn't move. Away. Neither did I. We said nothing, but the air between us felt louder than ever, like something waiting to be spoken. Later that afternoon, we cleaned paintbrushes on the back porch. Carter had decided to touch up the shed siding, and I volunteered to rinse the brushes while he sat nearby, watching the breeze stir the trees. I was halfway through scrubbing the second brush when he spoke. You're not just helping me, are you? I froze. The water kept running over my hands, but my heart stalled like it had missed a step. I turned slightly to look at him. He wasn't smiling, but his expression wasn't unreadable either. It was open. Like a door I hadn't realized. I was standing in front of. I don't know what I'm doing, I said quietly. I didn't expect this. Carter nodded once, like that answer was enough. He exhaled slowly, resting his hand on his thigh. I've been alone a long time, he said, and I've made peace with that. But then you show up, with your busted sneakers and bad coffee orders and that damn nervous smile. And now I keep catching myself hoping you'll stay just a little longer. The world went still around us. He wasn't joking. He wasn't trying to make it easier or less real. He was just saying it. Calm, intentional. The way Carter always was. I set the brush down in the basin and sat next to him. I don't even know what this is, I whispered. I just know it feels right. When I'm here, his eyes met mine. It feels right to me too. There was a moment just before it happened, where I could have looked away, could have pulled back and chalked it all up to loneliness or summer heat or a confusing few days. But I didn't. I leaned in, just a little, and he met me halfway. The kiss was slow, hesitant, like we were both asking a question and answering it at the same time. His lips were warm, steady. One of his hands found mine, fingers lacing softly, grounding me like an anchor. When we pulled apart, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to, because in that moment, something shifted. Not in a way that demanded definition. Not yet, but in a way that made the silence between us feel full instead of empty. Later, as the sun dipped low and painted the porch in gold, I sat beside him, our shoulders barely touching. The cicadas buzzed somewhere out in the trees. The sky faded from pink to blue, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't pretending. I wasn't trying to be the version of myself people expected. I was just here, with him. And that was enough. I was only supposed to help, for a few days, maybe a week, tops. But somehow, I stayed for 2 more. Not because Carter asked, not because the fence wasn't finished or the shed wasn't cleared. I stayed because something had shifted, quietly, permanently, in the space between us. We didn't talk about what had happened on the porch, not in the way most people would expect. There were no long, emotional conversations, no frantic questions about what it meant or where we were headed. Instead, we just lived. Mornings started with coffee, his black, mine with too much cream. I'd make toast while he stood at the sink, his knee brace peeking out from under faded pajama pants. We moved around each other like a routine we'd unknowingly rehearsed. Sometimes we worked, patching up the side of the house or clearing a corner of the attic. Other times we just sat. On the porch swing. In the grass. In the silence. And the silence stopped feeling like something that needed to be filled. He had a dry, quiet sense of humor that caught me off guard. The kind of wit that didn't ask for attention but got it anyway. One day I spilled lemonade on his flannel and apologized like I'd set the house on fire. He just raised an eyebrow and said, "Guess it's your shirt now." That became a running joke. "Guess it's yours now," he'd say whenever I borrowed something. His sweatshirt, his pen, the blanket from the couch. We never labeled anything, not what we were, not what we were doing, but it felt real, solid, like 2 people choosing to exist gently in each other's world. At night, we'd sit outside and watch the sky bleed into stars. Sometimes he'd talk about old jobs, favorite records, the way his mom used to hum Patsy Cline while folding laundry. Other times, we'd just sit there, knees brushing, saying nothing at all. And somehow, that was enough. It always felt like enough. The day I had to leave crept up faster than I expected. I woke up early, not because I needed to, but because I didn't want to rush it. My duffel bag sat open on the bed in the guest room, half full, half forgotten. I packed slowly, folding the flannel shirt with a little too much care. When I walked outside, Carter was already on the porch, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Figured you'd need this," he said. I took it, fingers brushing his. "Thanks." He sat down on the swing and I joined him, both of us staring out at the gravel drive like it might give us an excuse to stay in this moment longer. Neither of us said much. We didn't need to. When I finally stood to leave, he followed me to the car, hands tucked in the pockets of his worn jeans. I opened the door, then paused, turning back. "I'll come back," I said, the words catching a little in my throat. "If you'll let me." He looked at me, really looked at me, with those steady blue eyes and that quiet strength I'd come to crave. "You better," he said, a slow smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I smiled too. A little sad, a little full. And then I got in the car and drove away, watching the rearview mirror until the house disappeared behind the trees. I went home with dirt still under my fingernails and something softer in my chest. I didn't have answers. I didn't have a plan, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I'd found something real. Not a label, not a title. Just a man on a porch in a quiet town. And the feeling that, somehow, I'd been seen.